I suppose this is part of the new world order that we're currently living in, that everything is virtual. So today's topic that we'll be discussing is net zero buildings. We've got quite an interesting panel of people because it's quite a new and stringent environmental goal for many different markets. We've got some people here with experience in delivering and in markets where this is happening. And then also myself, I'm based in South Africa, and then Pauline is based in Ghana. So some local flavor to the mix as well. I'm going to let everybody present and introduce themselves during their presentation. So the format will be that we'll have a short presentation from each person. We'll learn what net zero buildings are, and then hopefully I will help to ask some of the questions that we all have. So in terms of the order that we were going to go in, I think Salome was going to go first. I'm not sure if all the permissions around presenting have been done, or if we are presenting from our own, but I'm assuming Salome is going to tell us just now whether it's working. Are you still on mute?
Yes, sorry. Good. Hello, everyone. Yes, I will be sharing my own screen. So give me 1 second, please.
Perfect. And Salome, we'll let you go through your entire presentation, and then as questions come in, we'll have a couple of Q&A, and then we'll carry on to the next one.
Are you able to see?
Not yet.
Nothing yet?
I think something is coming up now. There we go.
Okay. Okay, you can see?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right, good morning, good afternoon. I know we are all over the world. My name is Salome Gerba. I am currently working with DC Sustainable Energy Utility. We are the local for Washington, DC. We provide financial and technical assistance for any businesses or residents that want to invest in energy efficiency. A little bit about my background. By training, I'm a mechanical engineer. I've worked in the HVAC industry at different capacities, from engineering to design to project management for about 10 years. And beyond that, I have now transitioned into, for the past few years, into energy, specifically energy efficiency in the commercial space. Prior to my time at, my current role at DC Sustainable Energy Utility, I was with Department of Energy, the U.S. Government Department of Energy, heading the program specifically for our net zero buildings. So, and today my presentation is basically a little bit of an overview of net zero buildings, specifically in the United States, but I'll touch a little bit about how it relates to Africa, seeing that we are, doing a presentation, in Ghana about buildings, the Ghana Green Building Summit. So let me quickly go through the slides, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask later on. So, I'm sure all of us here, those of us that are interested in green buildings, we have heard about net zero by 2050. And this is kind of driven by, the International Energy Agency, and their goal, is to get us to net zero by 2050. This is an extremely ambitious goal, but the idea is to avoid the worst impacts of, the climate change, which really, as part of the Paris Agreement, is to keep global warming within the 1.5 degrees Celsius pre-industrial levels. So with that in mind, to kind of bring it in towards Africa is 49 of the 54 African countries have signed on to this 2015 Paris Agreement. And some have joined the zero carbon emissions, specifically South Africa, for example. Again, we realize this is a very ambitious goal for any country, let alone those in the developing nation. So we talk about net zero, but what exactly is a net zero building? A net zero building is an energy efficient building where on a source energy basis, the actual annual delivered energy is less or equal to the on-site renewable energy. Basically, it's whatever you're consuming and whatever you're producing, it's a balance. But how do we go about achieving this? So the first one, let's talk about, consumption. Any building, whether it's in the US or Ghana, Africa, throughout the world, we have lighting, we have, our cooling and heating needs, we have hot water, we have fans, pumps, different appliances, phone charging, computers, a bunch of appliances that go into our household. So that goes as part of our consumption. And then, so how do we now balance what we are consuming? And then we also need to add on any renewable energy to our production in terms of utility. So a building on a diet, think about our own bodies and a diet as well. So that is what you're consuming and what you're producing is balanced. So again, keep in mind, this is on an annual basis. For example, your production could be higher at summertime and much lower on wintertime. So it's annually calculated. And to achieve this, the first thing you have to do, again, as you can see, is the first one is energy efficiency. You have to have an energy efficient building and energy efficient systems, consistent operation and maintenance, and then change in user behavior also all comes into the consumption part of getting to zero, basically. And so to achieve this, we have to have at least about 50 to 70% reduction from standard buildings that exist today without the energy, without the net zero concept behind it. And then secondly is when you apply on-site renewable energy. In most cases within the US, this has been mostly solar. And again, this concept can be enlarged through a country or a region, depending on, but right now we're focusing on buildings. So it's whatever you're producing on your building in comparison to what you're consuming. So that is the definition of what a net zero building is. So what is, I mentioned earlier that, my focus earlier when I worked with Department of Energy was specifically zero energy. And the US has a zero energy now mission. And so that mission is to basically accelerate the development of zero energy commercial buildings, specifically the space that I was working on. But we also have retail, office buildings, residential as well. And to make sure that we are providing, as a federal government, that we are providing the technical assistance and the operations, construction, design, all of those to be able to deliver a zero energy building. The terms zero energy, actually US federal government uses the term zero energy. They're interchangeable in the US between net zero and US and zero energy. So if I say those things, please understand we mean the same thing. So, let me go back a little bit. And so we decided to focus, by we, I mean US government, decided to focus specifically initially on schools, and I'll explain why. In the US, there are about 130,000 K-12 schools, which host about 55 million students and 3.8 million teachers. That makes it the third largest subsector of commercial buildings and in terms of energy use. In addition, it costs about $6 billion a year annually, second to salaries, in terms of, the money spent by schools in the US. So it is a huge undertaking. Utility costs are a huge undertaking for our school, districts. In addition, there's about at least 14 billion, and this was this is not including the new funding that is set by this new administration, the Biden administration. There's probably a lot more, but at least there's 14 billion in new construction. So if we are already investing in new construction, we might as well start net zero. And then there's strong stakeholder involvement. Anytime a school is about to be built or added, there's a large community involvement, at least within the US system. There are school boards, there is community organizations that make decisions around this school. And again, as a whole, schools tend to be pillars to the community. In addition, they are excellent replication model potentials. What better way to do a market transformation through new generational education? If you end up going to a net zero school, the idea of you learning about net zero, you being able to touch this renewable energy, like as you can see in the picture, that is a school where the kids get to play with the solar energy, really learn firsthand how these buildings operate. And then through energy efficiency, the cost of the energy reduced can provide much needed funds for other schools and programs. For all those reasons, we thought schools are one of the first places to start investing. And so this again was about 8 or 9 years ago. So what were the challenges back then? Again, of course, these challenges still exist. You don't change the market in a few years. But so we decided to first identify what are our barriers and then what are the strategies. So with that, we said, the first one is lack of reliable information on how much it costs to build these buildings, or, lack of technical knowledge. Net zero investments perceived to be too expensive. That's always been the case. A school board, when they meet together to decide to build on a new school, do they even know what a net zero means? If you're not actively involved in the energy industry, these are not terms that you are familiar with. So, there's a lack of education in that space. And then a lack of integration between designers and school administrators. School administrators make decisions in a silo outside of these designers. Yes, designers might know about net zero, but again, there is that lack of education and then we need to bridge the gap with the school administrators. So a few of the strategies that we came up with is, the first one is, providing access to the feasibility study. The US, with the help of the National Renewable Laboratory, NREL, did a feasibility study, and we found that cost to cost, you're able to build a net zero building school, whether you live in the coldest part of the country or the warmest part of the country, you're able to build. And so this very highly technical study is available. Anyone can Google and be able to find it, but we are also placing it as a resource for our schools. Technical design and strategies. This goes as part of our feasibility study, but it shows case studies on exactly how to build technical designs. And we have published a book on how to go about this, how to talk to your stakeholders, how to make decisions around actually building a zero energy school. And in addition, there's what was called a Zero Energy Schools Accelerator, which I was actually leading. And this accelerator is basically creating a platform for like-minded school districts to get together, those that want to build net zero, to learn from each other, to get the support that they need, set them up with the proper engineers and designers so that it's easier for them to achieve net zero. Once doing all of that, currently the US, as a result of all the effort that was done, 34% of all net zero buildings are in the educational space, which is the largest market to hold, in the net zero space. And then, so right now we have about 189 emerging and 50 verified. The verified means annually, their data has been computed and verified by NBI. You will hear from, one of my fellow panelists. He is Alexi from NBI, and this data that you'll see, the map that you'll see, is from coast to coast. We have been able to build net zero schools within the United States. And bringing the focus in a little bit narrower to Washington, D.C., where I reside, so DC has very ambitious goals to be, in terms of sustainability, to be the healthiest, greenest city in the US by 2032, which includes reducing greenhouse gas emissions and energy use by 50%. And one of the ways to do this is through, focusing on net zero buildings. So, the Washington, D.C. Net Zero Program is a collaborative program with DCRA. Our DCRA is our local Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, which basically is in charge of enforcing building codes, providing building permits, issue business licenses are, one of some of the few things that they do. So by we, I mean the DC Sustainable Energy Utility, we work together. We are also an extension of the local DC government. So we work together in providing guidance to help property owners and developers to go from design to occupancy. It's a volunteer program. All building types, residential as well as commercial, in any size can apply. And DCR's assistance is technical assistance as well as expediting permitting. If you know anything about building a building within the US, permitting is one of the biggest headaches. It costs a lot of money, it costs a lot of time. The process is very tedious. But if you are, interested in building net zero program, DCRA themselves are, expediting the permitting as well as DCSU providing you financial and technical assistance. So with this program, we have been able to achieve about 10 emerging, net zero buildings in Washington, D.C., which include schools, recreation centers, commercial buildings. The building that you actually see is the American Geophysical Union building. It's one of the newest zero energy commercial. It's an office building. It's about 5 floors. If you are ever in Washington, D.C., I highly recommend, for you to get a chance, if you get a chance to visit this building. They do give tours regularly. It's an amazing building from all the different technologies that they use to be able to achieve the net zero status. So again, while big strides are being made to improve the net zero buildings, the number of net zero buildings, there are still a lot of challenges. Fear that net zero buildings will be too expensive. Again, this is always a concept, even though there are case studies where the cost has not been significantly higher. That is still a myth that's out there. Risk of new technologies, cost, time, underperformance. There is this idea where maybe they're not giving us enough windows, or maybe too much windows, so now it's too hot in there. But no, these buildings are designed with health and safety of the occupants in mind, and are in fact operate exceptionally better than standard buildings. Risk that building do not perform as designed. I just mentioned that again. Fear of occupants will be less satisfied. Again, I just mentioned, folks thinking that they're not getting enough AC or enough heating just to be able to save energy. And that in fact is not the case, because there are technological advances that have been made that, you're able to get enough of either your heating or your cooling needs without having to consume as much energy. And then, of course, workforce is a big deal. Making sure our building operators know exactly how to operate them, and this needs to go hand in hand with the technology advancement. So while those barriers exist in the US, in the world of the US, there are even greater barriers for Africa. So now I'm bringing it back to buildings in Africa. So the focus, to be quite frank, for Africa is power generation. Sub-Sahara is home to more than 1 billion people. And then although they produce just 0.6% of the cumulative global carbon dioxide emission, the population is still a growing population. So we still, ignoring it is not, the answer. However, these barriers still exist, and governments are now focused about power generation and economic development and bringing their people out of poverty. And we still, we're talking about power reduction, but there's still about 600 million people that still live without power. International investment, investment promised by the Paris Agreement, we're still, African countries are not receiving that fund. Lack of supporting government policies, again, because it's not a priority. It's not there. And then existing infrastructure has already deteriorated, from transformers to grid lines. All of those need to be upgraded before we think about net zero. And so anytime, we talk about energy in development countries, the concept of leapfrogging is thrown out. What exactly is leapfrogging? It is the ability of developing or less developed countries to essentially skip, what developed countries have done and get to more efficient, the renewable energy, all of those solutions that, help us meet the net zero energy. However, again, like I mentioned, all of those aspects require large investment and a government that's focused on, these matters. So, in conclusion, to be able to drive the change in Africa alone, the demographic is shifting, which is about, we will be adding about I say we because I am originally Ethiopian, although I reside in the US. So please excuse that. The demographic shift, so we will be adding about 1 billion people by 2050. So that's a lot of people that need, power, right? So that's a lot of electrification that needs to happen before we even think about net zero. And then urbanization. 500 million people are becoming a part of Africa's urban population by 2040. These demographic population shifts will have significant implication on energy demand, transportation, industry, cooling, heating, all of those. And every African, like any other developed country, will like, their cell phones charged, their TVs on, light whenever we need it. All those things need to be balanced. Along with that, if we are able to have, African-friendly technology advancement, and I specifically put African-friendly because this one solution for all does not necessarily work for us. We need, solutions tailored for Africa. And then in the international investment, the funds that were promised need to be delivered. So governments can focus and be able to invest in energy efficiency as well as renewable energy. And then before that happens, we need stable governments with, that make deep commitments and put programs and policies to help, get us to net zero. Thank you. Again, my name is Salome Girma, and this is my information.
Great, thank you for that, Salome. I think there was quite a striking stat there that you had of 50 to 70% reduction in energy. Is that something that is being achieved within that net zero program? Because I think what's important for us now today is to understand what is being achieved.
Yeah, well,
so if the targets are 50 to 70%.
Yes, so you basically have to reduce your energy unit index, EUI, per square footage to make sure that you get to this figure, basically to the 50 to 70%. And my colleagues—
Yes, but within the projects that have been verified, is that energy use intensity being achieved before the renewable offset? Okay. Yes, I think that's something that.
And you'll see more details from
fellow panelists. Yeah, and I think that's something for all of us to keep in mind, because we're trying to figure out whether or not this is possible, and the efficiency first approach where we have to reduce significantly, and this is 50 to 70% reduction on a performance that was already probably a bit more efficient due to the energy code that is in there. We'll quickly go on to Smita to present next.
Sure. I am setting up my slides here. Just give me 1 second.
Cool.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Yes, we can see it.
Okay, excellent. So thank you, Salome, for that interesting presentation. And let me put this out into the universe that it's Salome's dream to work on development in Africa. So in case anybody is listening to that.
Thank you for the shout out.
It's a shout out for Salome. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, Dennis, Cyril, and Chilu. Thanks to all the participants for tuning in. I'm really happy to be here today. A little bit about me. My name is Smita Chandra Thomas. I'm the founder and principal of a US-based consulting practice called Energy Shrink. We work with both the private sector and the public sector, including the US Department of Energy, the DC Public Service Commission, I also consult to IFC, which is a member of the World Bank Group on the EDGE Green Buildings program. That's how I know Dennis and Chilu, who often emails me about his EDGE projects. I have a master's in building science from the University of California, UCLA and Berkeley, and I've worked in the US since 1997, first at a Department of Energy lab for 2 years, and then in the private sector since 1999. In the coming months, I'll also be teaching a course on decarbonizing buildings at the George Washington University in DC. So today we are talking about, is net zero a fad? So through my presentation, I'd like to share with you that really it's the only way forward. And it makes a lot of sense from many points of view. Besides climate change, it's great for thermal comfort and the financial bottom line. So let me dive in. There is a strong business case for green buildings in emerging economies. Buildings consume large amounts of energy. The demand for new buildings, especially housing, is booming in the emerging economies. And the utility costs for both residential and commercial sectors is very high. So when we build green, we hit all of these aspects. Let's look at a couple of examples. In Kumasi, Ghana, the EDGE certified green mother and child unit in this hospital is now able to divert the money that it's saving on utilities into better facilities for mother and children. This actually helps to save these utility costs, and these improved facilities are reducing the mortality rate among newborns and mothers. Like I mentioned, this is an IFC EDGE project. Now this one is a housing project. Thanks to living in a certified green building, a low-income resident in this affordable housing development in South Africa is able to save the equivalent of 1 month's rent. This image is of a US lab, and it was built as the same cost as a regular commercial building, actually a little cheaper. So average Class A buildings come in at about $300 a square foot in the US, and this was built for about $260 a square foot. It's a beautiful modern building with lots of daylight, lighting controls, and mechanized shading. This is in a mild climate, which would be similar to Accra. With all the good passive design features, the design team was able to completely avoid putting in a cooling system. And this building achieved LEED Platinum certification. On this image on the right is the first zero carbon community in London. It's called BedZ. It uses natural ventilation to lower its cooling requirements. On the left are more examples of natural ventilation. This building in Austria has no cooling or heating. This cold climate building has thick walls, really thick walls, and windows that are right-sized. Note that all these high-performance buildings, none of them are glass boxes. So glass boxes were very popular in the 20th century, but they do not belong in the 21st century. Please do not build glass boxes. Passive design can be beautiful, and it saves money. This DC lab came in 17% under budget because it was designed with high-performance glass and shading. And with that, it was able to save money on its HVAC and controls. What if we don't do anything? We are in a climate crisis, and I'm not going to go into each of these issues that we are about to face, against which we must be resilient. So every building that we build and retrofit is helping us fight against these climate impacts. The countries, all across the world have pledged to reduce buildings emissions. And we have the COP26 that is just coming up. Let's see what we pledge afresh in the coming days. But there is a lot happening that we must meet the requirements of. Buildings are the largest users of global energy and the largest source of global emissions from fossil fuels. I'm sure a lot of you know this already, but it's worth remembering why what we are doing is so important. US building energy is mostly produced from fossil fuels, and this is true almost everywhere in the world still. And we are still continuing to build coal plants, which is unconscionable, in this day and age when we are fighting climate change. In the US, what we have found is that GDP and energy use have been decoupled. This is true in almost all advanced economies. As the GDP is going up, the energy use is going down. The idea is that we can do more using less. Even in China, this is true today. So we must be mindful that energy efficiency can help and we can do more with less. Africa is one of the fastest growing regions. It's going to see a boom in its growth in the coming decades. So it becomes really important for new construction to be very mindful of the fact that the building sector has the most potential for reduction in emissions. Yes, it is true that transportation and industry also have a lot of emissions, but building sector is the sector where we have the technology today to get to net zero. We have the technology today to reduce our emissions. And we can do this across a range of GHG, that is greenhouse gas abatement actions. This is a very famous figure. It's called the Mckenzie cost abatement curve. Many of you may have seen it because this is all the way from 2009, and it hasn't been updated in the last 20 years because it's still, it's still valid today. It shows that many of these measures for cleaner power cost some money. That's why they are on the positive axis, but they can have a lot of impact. But on the negative,
I think we lost Smita a little bit there. Are you back, Smita?
I am here. Are you able to see my screen?
No, we can't see it anymore.
Yeah, it kind of kicked me out. Okay, let me try again. Do you see it?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Anyway, so we were talking about the cost abatement curve. So the point of this study was to show that you can do a lot in buildings at negative cost because you're actually saving money by doing them. So moving on to the next slide. Green buildings are also a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. This is from an investment point of view, a study put out by IFC that shows that, IFC is an impact investor and it is focused on developing economies. It has shown that these can be really profitable investments. Embodied emissions are another area that are becoming increasingly important. As your building operations costs are going down, embodied emissions are becoming important. That is the emissions that come from the materials that go into the buildings. So as you're thinking about building operations, also think about what you're using to build your buildings. And here I'd really like to stress that in the last 50 years, we've kind of lost sight of where we are with our buildings. Before the invention of central air conditioning, central heating and cooling, all over the world, we used to have local building technologies that would help us live comfortably in the local climate. Now that we have air conditioning, we are starting to just throw in an air conditioning system and put in a glass box. And it makes zero sense. Really, it makes zero sense. So we need to learn from our history and try to think about what makes sense in our country, wherever we are located, so that we can reduce our dependence on heating and cooling systems that are fired by fossil fuels. This is another point I'd really like to share. Salome defined what net zero buildings are, but I'd like to really stress that all net zero buildings are not equal. So in this slide, you see 3 figures. All of them are net zero buildings. And what we mean by that is that the amount of energy they consume, they are making up for that amount of energy with solar panels. That is technically the definition of net zero. However, these 3 buildings are different from each other. The first building is consuming 150 kW, that's its demand on site, of which 100 is being supplied from the grid and 50 is coming from the solar panels. This building has a giant appetite. Next to that is a building that has been designed much better. It has less glass, it has more shading, and it has half the appetite. And therefore, it draws half the power from the grid, and it needs half a solar panel system is also halved. So we have to remember that even though we may be balancing what we are producing on the grid and on the solar panels, what is being produced on the grid is already emitting emissions and going out into the atmosphere. So whatever you produce on your solar panels, even though it may be net zero because it's canceling out what you pull from the grid, the emissions from the grid are still going into the air. And once they're in the air, they stay in the air for hundreds of years, right? So if you want to really clean up the atmosphere, we have to stop pulling so much from the grid. So the last figure here is showing a building that is not getting anything from the grid because it has all of its energy coming from clean energy. So really the goal for all of us should not be net zero. The goal for all of us should be zero use of fossil fuels because that's what creates emissions. We need energy to live, we need energy to work, but we do not want to get it from fossil fuels. That's the goal. This is a little bit on the net zero building process, and Alexi from NBI is going to probably talk more about it, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but this image is actually from NBI, who are one of the leaders in how to build for net zero. I'll just say very quickly that the idea is to first say, I'm going to lower my energy use on site. That's the number one step. And then you think about how you're going to do that, whether you do that through performance-based contracts or using energy modeling, applying energy conservation measures. You just want to keep reducing your energy use before you think about going to your solar panels and storage. So what you see here is what we at Energy Shrink call the pare down framework. If you imagine it, it's like taking a piece of wood and whittling it down. So we say, you start by minimizing your building loads. That is, you use passive design techniques to minimize as much as possible the loads that building is going to put on your building systems. Once you have these smaller loads that are going to the building systems, you then have a smaller building system to invest in, and you have to make that system as efficient as possible, which means you right size it. You don't use the typical HVAC, mechanical engineer thinking of, oh, let's make it 2 times or 3 times as a safety factor. No, because that makes your mechanical system cycle a lot. And of course, you're paying more out of pocket to begin with, but then all the cycling, wear and tear actually reduces the life of your mechanical system. So you want to right size it. You want to utilize ground heat. You want to maximize your system efficiency on and lighting and equipment. Now with all of that, then you use your advanced controls. And then with this whittled down building that has a much smaller need, you put in a smaller, renewable energy system, and then you support it with storage and a clean grid if possible to have a much smaller footprint for your building. Now, this is an impact analysis we did for a sample building in DC. In blue, you see the baseline building, And in gray, you see the integrated case, which is using a bunch of efficiency measures. I'll just highlight the bottom line here. So you see at the bottom, you see that we have reduced, and this is only a model, of course, but the models are, not that far from reality if you do them well. Here, the EUI we are showing is 80% energy savings you can get on your building even before you have started thinking about your solar panels. Now,
Smita, just being mindful of time and a couple of questions that have come through for you. Do you mind if we go to ask some questions quickly? Because we are just mindful, we've got 2 more.
Sure.
You have
I'm
a lot
actually
of
almost
more
at the end. This is my second last slide. So I'm just going to close now. Just give me a minute here. So,
Sure.
what we are showing with this building is that your HVAC system costs are going to come down. You're going to save hundreds of thousands of dollars on HVAC and millions on your PV system. So essentially the idea is that this money that you save on your HVAC and PV, when you think about it in an integrated fashion, you can put that into your building, in your thermal comfort, your insulation, and save money that way. So in closing, I'd just like to say that, the green building design process is ripe for innovation. And I welcome your questions.
Smita, I think when the kind of like some parallels from Salome's one, which is, you're reducing 50 to 70% energy. And then a lot of the examples you had talked about no HVAC at all, which is quite a big mind shift for people to think, that you have to design a building with no HVAC. And one of the other issue you raised of glass boxes, So I think with net zero, you almost have to be able to look at a building and then say, you'll never achieve it. And do you have any experience with that aspect with clients and project teams to say that we actually have to go and we have to drop 60% of the glass on this building?
So, Anshilu, I'll keep my answer short because I'm very aware that Pauline and Alexi haven't spoken yet. But in 2007, this is a long time ago, we were asked by EPA to, this very question, like, is it even possible to get to net zero? And like Salome also mentioned, we found that if we took a large office building, this is not a school, which is actually easier to work with. We took a large office building across all climate zones in the US, and we have a large variety. We were able to show that for new construction, you can get to net zero in any climate, even for a large office building. And we see this like all around me, where I sit near in DC. We have many schools. Typically, that's where the money is. People are able to, see the results there. We have schools that are coming in at, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use BTUs because that's what we are familiar with here, but they're coming in at under 20 BTUs per square foot, multiple schools. And then they have these solar systems which make them net zero. So yes, it is very possible. And I think NBI has a great database on many buildings that have achieved net zero.
Well, thank you. Pauline, I know you've done a lot of research on green buildings in Ghana. And, as an industry that is sort of starting out, it's still relatively new. And now we're discussing a building that is going to now be 50 to 70% better than what we would consider already a green building. I think it would be interesting to hear your take now on this new goal and how feasible and the business case for green buildings before we started to talk about net zero and now that we're talking about buildings that are going to surpass the ones that you've already sort of been researching.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lombe. Thank you, Smita. Thank you, Salome, for your wonderful presentation. I think you put everything much into context for me to come in. And what I'm going to talk about is very Ghana specific. and because it's Ghana Green Building Summit, and it is based on a research that I have already I completed in July, looking at the having listened to the importance of green buildings. The question is, are property values impacted by green features? And if so, does it incentivize people in Ghana to invest in green buildings? And I'll give a little bit of context before I go into the details. But we've already heard about the menace of climate change, how it's causing, we saw from Smita's presentation about the bushfires, it causes the flood, it causes a lot of food insecurity, it increases the incidence of poverty in Africa especially. And the Africa Development Bank has actually stated that about 7 out of 10 countries in the world that are most impacted by climate change are found in Africa. So African countries must be very, very interested in this whole climate change agenda and to look at the various options available to them in mitigating them. And I work in energy and extractives. And so, sorry, I've not introduced myself. I'll probably do that in the course of time, but my work has been in energy and extractives. I have worked at the Africa Center for Energy Policy, heading the policy unit and doing research and policy analysis to influence policies in the energy sector, including issues on climate change. I am currently an external advisor to the EU Negative Emissions Project, comprising of 16 members. It's a 16-member consortium, you know, looking at new technologies that could improve negative emissions. Then I'm also on so I'm part of a group of experts for the Oxford Climate Alumni Network. So basically, this is a brief about me. Now, when we come to Africa, as I mentioned, this whole green building is very important to us because of the potential impacts of climate change on our economies. And achieving net zero is very important because, as we've heard already, it reduces costs. We know that in 2019, about 28% of global energy emissions came from buildings. And we also know that a lot of people live in buildings, and most of these buildings are built from cement. And the manufacturing processes for cement has very grave emission impact. Cement factories use huge fossil fuel, and also the transformation of limestone causes emission. So we need to be serious about moving away from the traditional forms of buildings. Now in Ghana, the cost of energy is about 35% of total operational costs for hotels. And it is the same, it's also high for office buildings. And so for me, the research I did was to look at how individuals and companies are interested in investing in green buildings, considering the potential benefits that it brings. And I find that the key finding is that in Ghana, there is a link between green buildings and property values. But then that link or the realization of that value is not possible in the present, in our present situation. It is very much possible in the future, let's say in 15 to 20 years time. For now, we cannot realize that value. And the reason is that first, people do not have knowledge about the importance of green buildings. The awareness is very low, and people are comfortable with the building methods that exist now, and nobody or not many people are taking steps to realize the importance of green buildings for the environment, for their bottom lines, and also for their businesses. And so because of that lack of awareness, not many people are investing. And for those people that are even investing, the problem is that it is very expensive. It is expensive to build. The UK Green Building Council has estimated that building green office buildings cost about 6.2% more than building traditional or normal buildings that we know. And this has been established in literature. There are a number of research that stays the same. And we've seen that in the presentations from the earlier presenters. There's also the high investment cost. In Ghana here, it is difficult to get cheap financing for green buildings. So because it is expensive and people need funding from the banks, it is also difficult to get funding because of high interest rates. The market is also not very matured. You barely see green buildings around. There are a few dotted here and there, especially in Accra, but there's not much case studies to prove to people the potential benefits green buildings can bring to property values. So that lack of data in itself prevents the promotion of the green buildings. So the question is how, so for me, the next question was, how do we move away from, talking about the challenges and realizing the benefits? Most of the people I interviewed were very clear that awareness creation is very important. And what we are doing today fits into the whole awareness creation agenda. And the other most important thing people talked about is the need to demonstrate the economic benefits of green buildings. I looked up the green buildings elsewhere in the UK, in the US, showing the potential benefits that it brings. I mean, the actual benefits these green buildings are realizing. And these are Western markets, but we are in frontier. I can't even describe our market in Ghana, the real estate markets for green buildings, as frontier, because the concept is very new and many people are now hearing about it and getting used to it. So if you look at the Siemens Crystal building in London, the building was, the green building was built in 2012 at a cost of 30 million pounds. And the building generates 20% of electricity from solar. And then the 70% of light that comes to the building is natural. And the savings on carbon emissions is 71%. And there is it's estimated that about 500,000 pounds is saved every year in energy savings. So imagine a building that was built in 2012 for 30 million, yielding some benefits, savings of 500,000 pounds per annum on energy savings. There's a similar building, One Embankment, owned by PricewaterhouseCoopers in London. It's also retrofitted. So it was an old building, 1990, retrofitted into a net zero building. It has roof gardens. It is fueled by recycled waste vegetable oil. So not the normal fuel we are talking about. And it also has open plan spaces. It has roof gardens and green walls. And that building emits 40%
we're going to go to a place where we're starting out and we have to really, jump over the slightly less efficient buildings. We still have Alexi.
There's one more thing I need to say, which has to do with interventions about policy and setting standards. It is something that is very critical to do in Ghana. I know it's been started, IFC has led it. There's now a revision of the building codes. Now it has to be passed into law, and that is where the hurdle is. So governments, where policy goes, businesses follow. So when government is very proactive on regulation, the green building agenda would improve in Ghana. So that's the bit I wanted to add.
Yeah, I think that's an important item and a good segue into Alex's data and experience, because they're obviously tracking all the buildings that are actually achieving net zero. So I think it's very important for us to sort of hear from him and see the real world data that's been collected. Even though we are pressed for time, so Alexi, I know you had a couple of really nice images where you could show us that this energy use intensity is being achieved across all the buildings, and it's a common thread. So while you pull that up, we'll let you just quickly go through some of the more salient aspects so that we can still have a discussion. And I'll be remiss if I don't mention the fact that I'm actually sitting in a net zero office. Our office is we're actually off grid. So it is completely possible, and it's really something that we should be going to. And just before you start as well, Alexi, within your presentation, if we could also just hear the role that legislation has had on this, because obviously, you know, your base is of an energy efficiency, of a different energy efficiency baseline, whereas we're starting where most of our market doesn't have any the building codes or anything that is going to drive the baseline energy efficiency, which makes data and all of that a bit more difficult. Cool.
Sure. And as I go, Chilu, I want to be aware of time. You know, it's we're getting toward the scheduled end. So do you want me to go through the whole session, or would you prefer I hit some highlights? You can also flag me when you think I'm about halfway through the time you would like me to take, and I'll close it out from there.
You know, I really like the slide where you've got what is being achieved, you know, because we're trying to answer this question around, is this thing a fad? And you've got the data that says, no, it's being achieved. And I think there's always this aspect of like, if something is coming from a different market and we'd be like, well, it's possible there, but maybe not here. And I think a lot of your data tells us that conditions are similar. And in most African countries, we have better climatic conditions actually. So it should be possible. Well,
let me put some buildings on the map, quite literally. So thanks for having me. I'm Alexi Miller, Associate Technical Director with New Buildings Institute. We're a nonprofit organization based in the USA. We work across the US and to a smaller extent internationally, including on codes and policies. So as you mentioned, you know, building energy codes. A few years back, we wrote the building code for Fiji, for example. But in any case, one of the projects I manage at New Buildings Institute is I keep track of all of the net zero energy and zero carbon and carbon neutral buildings across North America. So we have a database, it's called the Getting to Zero Buildings database, online, accessible, I'll have a link in a moment, where we track those buildings. And what we've seen over the about 10 years since we started tracking this industry, so we've seen about a 12-fold increase in the count of buildings across North America that are either achieving zero energy performance, in which they produce as much energy as they consume over a year, or they're emerging to that level. And so this chart here on the right shows the blue buildings are trying to get there. Maybe I personally have not seen their data. They may have made it to zero, but I don't know that, or they're still striving for that goal. And then the green ones show projects we know they really did get there. And as Chilu mentioned, they're all across the country and across other regions. They are also all across the world. I just don't personally have the bandwidth to track the entire world worth of net zero buildings. So my map is only North America. So apologies for that. But I know that this is not a fad here at home where I live, and nor is it a fad in many other parts of the world. It's eminently achievable, and each dot on the map here represents one, or in some cases towns with 20 or more net zero buildings that are actually on the map. The US is a very climatically diverse country, and there are net zero energy buildings in every climate zone across North America, from deserts to cold mountains, including hot and humid regions. There are net zero buildings in every major building type. This map just shows commercial and multifamily buildings, but there are single family homes all the way up to very large office buildings, and indeed, industrial or institutional like laboratory as well. I want to briefly mention, we've heard from a couple of folks already today that net zero energy is quite critical, and I consider these, we at MB, I consider these to be the 5 foundations of getting to a net zero carbon building or a carbon neutral building, since after all, we as a world are not terribly concerned about running out of energy. There's a lot of oil, coal, gas, as well as renewable energy potential. There's plenty of energy in the world. The problem is what happens if we use all that energy. That's the cost, the environmental implications of consuming all that energy and producing, delivering, etc. So these foundations, I think, make it clear. The first 2 energy efficiency and renewable energy. Zero energy buildings as currently conceived generally focus on those two. Be very efficient, efficiency first, that's where it should be as the foundation, and then offset with renewable energy to get to zero. The point I'd like to make is that if we really care about solving the climate crisis, we need to consider some other foundations as well. Building grid integration, storage, electric vehicles and resiliency considerations, electrification so that we stop burning fossil fuels in buildings, and the life cycle impacts, the embodied carbon of those. So very brief note on each of these, and Chilu, feel free to pop up if I should be either skipping some sections or moving along. So that database, all those dots on the map, I'll scroll back up to this. What we did here is we took all of these buildings, for those we actually know the energy consumption and production for the buildings, and we put all that data into one set. This is the energy use intensity. I've converted it to metric units of all of the net zero buildings for which we do know the data across North America, commercial and multifamily. And what this shows us is basically they're taking an efficiency first approach. The median energy use intensity for verified net zero buildings is about 60 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. And for the emerging, it's slightly higher. Both of those are really good targets. In kBTU per square foot per year, in these silly imperial units we seem to be stuck with here in the US, it's about 20 to 22 kBTU per square foot per year. For reference, a code level building using the most up-to-date, highly efficient energy code, the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code, it's called international, it's really mostly here in the US, that comes in at about 145 or so kilowatt hours per square meter per year. So these buildings are using less than half of the baseline of even a very modern, stringent, high performance code. And you saw in Smita's presentation that there are real cost implications of doing that. If you invest a bit more in the envelope and in passive systems, then you can use that savings to offset, or rather, then you get savings. You don't have to invest in large cooling systems, other mechanical systems. And if you're trying to get to zero, you have these vast savings on PV. You don't need nearly as much renewable energy.
I think just on that image, I think what is really important around the energy efficiency, so because we have to try and wrap it up, but I think this is really great context because that median actually represents sort of 3 to 4 times less energy use than a typical building in South Africa, for example. And that's a huge opportunity. And I think that's a lot of what we need to take away from this, is that it's possible, but it's going to be like nothing you've ever done before. When we work on net zero buildings, we always tell people that it's not going to be the same. You know, you are not going to come out with what you did previously. You'll be challenged.
Yeah, and we've found with a lot of design teams in both new construction and existing building renovations that setting an aggressive target early is absolutely critical. So you might say you've got a new building project coming up, and you want to leapfrog. You want to say, we don't need to do what we're used to doing. Let's not go half measures. Let's set an aggressive energy target early, get the whole team on board, from the owner to the designer to the builder. And with that target in mind early, then you can do things like shift your investment from mechanical systems to envelope, you know, building shell, windows, etc. If you're able to do that, which is enabled, those kinds of strategies are enabled by setting the target early and getting everyone understanding that and on the same page, then the cost premium does not need to be very high. We've looked into the cost premium of net zero energy buildings, and we've found it varies from maybe negative 10% to positive 10%, with an average or a median somewhere around about a 2% increase in total cost. But in many cases, the net zero building costs less. And that's often driven by the fact that you don't need to buy such a large mechanical system, right? In some of these cases, there simply is no chiller, or it's very small. And so a key piece is setting an aggressive goal early and getting the whole team on board. So this graphic gives you an idea where that goal might be.
Yeah. And so if we're trying to answer those questions, and that maybe can be the way we can try and wrap it up, because I know someone in Accra is jumping up and down. So if we say are net zero buildings a fad, we can just quickly have a closeout answer from everyone, yes or no, maybe, or from the panel, not from the remaining 96 participants. But the remaining 96 participants can maybe answer in the chat. Maybe we can do that. We can finish off that way. If everybody that is a participant that's still here, can you just say yes, no, or maybe about whether or not net zero is possible? And we'll get Cyril to email a poll to see what everybody said. Cool. So I'll just take it in the order that I'm looking at people here. So Pauline's, Salome, Alexi, and then Smita. Yes, no, maybe.
Okay, so it's a fad depending on the context. So if it is an African context where, as Alexi says, the cost is between, it's relative, it's not much, but in our context, it's a different question altogether. So depending on the context, it could be a fad.
Will it be a no? Okay, there's a yes. Okay, I think we'll leave everybody's answers to the panel there on the side. If it would be great if everybody could rename themselves, because it looks like David Opoku is the only person that's giving us answers. Cool. So to the panelists, thank you very much. It was great to meet everyone. From my side, I think we'll definitely be connecting with everyone again. And then back to Accra.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Bye-bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So